The aim of this lecture is to really describe human trafficking and to understand what is meant by and distinctions between people smuggling and human trafficking. The terms are often used interchangeably, but they are in fact different. We also want to determine what types of activities are involved and to understand, as ever, the links to organised crime. I also want to demonstrate links to other aspects in this unit, specifically identity crime, financial crime, maritime crime, which was obviously the subject of Week 5's lecture, and illicit markets, and understanding the changes that are taking place within organised crime in relation to human trafficking and people smuggling. What is trafficking in human beings? Well, it is a multi-billion-dollar form of international organised crime constituting modern-day slavery. Victims are recruited and trafficked between countries and regions using deception or coercion. They're stripped of their autonomy, freedom of movement and choice, and face various forms of physical and mental abuse. And it's actually much more widespread from certain areas of the world than you would initially suppose. Certainly, slavery is not something that has been banished to the history books. Trafficking persons, on the other hand, is what the public assume is associated with the forced recruitment of women for sexual exploitation by highly organised criminal gangs. The modus operandi, i.e. the method by which they use, and individuals involved is very diverse. It occurs in a range of industries and affects women, men and children, and is therefore not limited to the recruitment of women for sexual exploitation. It's been perpetrated by relatively unsophisticated offenders, including individuals acting alone or with one other person, such as a spouse, as well as criminal gangs. So actually it's a very wide-ranging crime. And all of these have implications for prevention, detection and prosecution, because it is so wide-ranging with so many different types of people involved. The methods they're using is diverse. This makes it very difficult to police. Trafficking in persons is actually defined by the United Nations as when a person intentionally recruits, transfers or harbours another person through some form of deception, fraud, violence or coercion for the purposes of exploitation. Exploitation, in this definition, includes contact so severe and harmful that the proper to describe it as, for example, slavery, forced labour or sexual exploitation. People can also be trafficked for removal of organs. Obviously, for medical purposes, it's best to have the organs recently removed from the body. So if you traffic the person and then remove the organs, you can harvest the organs from the living donor for purchase. International legal definition recognises the different standard for children requiring only recruitment, transfer or harbouring for exploitation. People smuggling, defined in Article 3 of the Migrant Smuggling Protocol, and it involves two main elements. One is intentionally facilitating illegal entry of a person into another country. Two, for some form of financial or material benefit. While migrant smuggling and trafficking in persons are distinctly legal concepts, in reality these two types of crimes do overlap. For example, a trafficked person may also have been smuggled as part of the migration process, and similarly, a smuggled person may also become a victim of trafficking. Once they're in the hands of the smugglers or the traffickers, other illegal activities ensue, and a lot of the time the person being trafficked, the person being smuggled, even though they may have paid for the service, then becomes a victim of crime themselves. So a broad distinction can be made between people smuggling and human trafficking. Individuals who pay a smuggler in order to gain a legal entry to a country do so, initially at least, voluntarily. Victims of human trafficking are often duped or forced into entering another country, so they may actually be kidnapped in that sense, as opposed to paying somebody to smuggle them across a border. Excuse me. In principle, the relationship between the smuggler and the migrant ends once the individual arrives in a new country. However, evidence of people smugglers continuing to exploit illegal migrants through threats and demands for additional fees exists. So once the smuggled individuals enter a new country, they're still at the hands of the smugglers, who often know their family situation at home, so people's families can be put under threat if the illegal migrants don't continue to do what the smugglers wish. So this would include things like handing over wages, etc. So the migrants, illegal migrants, are basically working for the smugglers once they're in their new country of residence. There are three main types of trafficking. There's trafficking for forced labour, trafficking for sexual exploitation, and trafficking of organs. They're all closely connected, and a lot of the time this does actually equal people smuggling. So somebody who may be initially trafficked for forced labour may end up having their organs harvested, or sexual exploitation, etc., may and then be used for forced labour. So although there are three types initially this is really talking about why the person was smuggled in the first place, but obviously there's a lot of overlap between these categories. Human migration is not a new phenomenon. For centuries, people have left homes in search of better lives elsewhere, and this is, as long as people have been people, then we have migrated in search of differences, variations, improvements in living standards. In the last decade, the globalisation, which is a word we've come across before, so the spreading of people around the world, movement of people around the world, has caused an unprecedented amount of migration from the least developed countries of Asia, Africa, Latin America and Eastern Europe to Western Europe, Australia and North America, primarily as people look for improved living conditions. Economic instability appears to be the main reason for illegal migration movement throughout the world, while many migrants are refugees or asylum seekers. So that would be economic instability, often as a result of political instability in various countries throughout the world, and people then migrate across land and sea borders throughout the world, illegally and legally, and others are refugees seeking safety, or asylum seekers seeking safety from war zones, for example, or once a zone has been and a war is ended, some lives of the people from that country may be in danger if they were from the wrong national group or other ethnic minority, for example, so they may then seek asylum somewhere else in the world where they will be hopefully safe. So what are the links to organised crime? Coming back to obviously the topic of the whole unit, so we're putting this in the general feel for the unit now. Well, criminal networks control the flow of migrants across borders. Due to more restrictive immigration policies and improved technology to monitor border crossings, illegal migrants increasingly rely on the help of organised people smugglers. The better the police get at preventing illegal migration, the more is actually involved with getting people across borders in terms of giving them false documents, travel, hiding people, etc. People smuggling is not a homogeneous activity, meaning it's not a simple strategy, so it's quite complex. There's many different facets involved. For example, the price of the trip varies considerably, as do conditions of travel. Length of travel, for example, can be days up to weeks, depending on the method of travel and how far the smugglers are taking the individuals. And the status upon arrival can also vary significantly. Smuggling is carried out by land, air or sea, or obviously a combination of these, depending on where the smugglers are taking the individuals being trafficked or smuggled. And the status upon arrival varies significantly depending on what the smuggler will want from that person. If they're happy to just take the initial fee for smuggling, then the individual will be released on arrival in that country. However, if they intend to keep milking that person for financial gain, then their situation is going to be very different.